Welcome to Midnight Whispers, the place where shadows stretch longer than the daylight and the quiet of the wild seems alive. Tonight, we're heading to Alaska, a land of endless winter nights, forgotten mining towns, and dark forests where the cold feels like it's watching you. These aren't campfire stories. They're true accounts, local legends, and first-hand encounters gathered from people who swore they'd never speak of them again. As we step into this frozen frontier together, remember, every sound carries farther in the cold, and sometimes, something might be listening back. Before we begin, make sure you've subscribed and tapped the bell. You don't want to miss what lurks in the next whisper. Now, pull your coat tight. The story begins here, where the ice holds secrets older than memory. Story 1. Pulse beneath the ice core was breathing when we pulled it up, and that should have been the moment we stopped drilling. My name is Marcus Chen. I am a geologist, or I was before Toolik Lake. I spent 15 years studying permafrost in the Arctic, taking samples, measuring depth, documenting the slow collapse of our planet. These frozen places. It was routine work, scientific, safe, until we drilled through something that had been waiting under the ice for longer than human civilization. The expedition started in late September 2023. Our research station sat on the shore of Toolik Lake in northern Alaska, about 150 miles south of the Arctic Ocean. 6 of us, 2 geologists, 2 climate scientists, a data tech, and a camp manager. We were there to extract deep ice cores, some going back 50,000 years. Frozen time capsules that could tell us about ancient climates and atmospheric conditions. The equipment was state-of-the-art. Computer-controlled drills, sensors that measured everything from temperature to pressure to mineral content. We could extract a core sample from 300 feet down and have the data uploaded to our servers before the ice even hit the surface. On our 3rd day of drilling, we hit something at 270 feet that made every sensor go haywire. The drill bit slowed like it had punched through into empty space. Then it caught again, but the resistance was wrong. Not solid ice, something dense but yielding. The temperature readings spiked, then dropped, then settled into a pattern that made no sense. The core sample that came up was unlike anything I had seen in 15 years of Arctic research. It was ice, technically, but it had a gray tint to it, almost like smoke frozen mid-swirl. And when I placed my hand near it, I could feel warmth. Not heat, just the absence of cold, like the ice was holding onto something, generating something from within. Then I felt a pulse. It was faint, so faint I thought it was my own heartbeat reflecting back through my palm. But when I pulled my hand away and watched the core sample on the examination table, I saw it. A slight expansion and contraction. Rhythmic, steady, 1 pulse every 8 seconds. I called the team over. We all stood there, watching this cylinder of ancient ice breathe. The data tech, a kid named Ryan from Michigan, started laughing nervously. He said it had to be some kind of pressure differential. Air pockets expanding and contracting as the ice warmed. But the ice wasn't too warming. The sensors confirmed it was holding at exactly minus 20 degrees Celsius. We took samples, ran every test we could think of. The ice contained no organic material, no bacteria, no algae, no microscopic life of any kind. It was just water, frozen under immense pressure over thousands of years. Except for that pulse, that slow, steady rhythm that continued even as we sectioned the core into smaller pieces. That night, the computer started acting strange. I was in my bunk around midnight when I heard Ryan shouting from the data lab. I threw on my thermal gear and ran across the compound. Inside, all 6 of our workstations were active, screens blazing in the darkness. But none of them were displaying normal data anymore. Every screen showed the same thing, lines of text scrolling upward in a language I didn't recognize. Not Cyrillic, not any Asian script, something older, symbols that looked almost cuneiform but wrong, angular in ways that hurt to look at. And underneath the visual static, a sound, a low hum coming from every speaker in the building. Not random, structured, repeating every 8 seconds, the same rhythm as the pulse in the ice. Ryan was frantically trying to shut down the systems. Nothing worked. The keyboards were unresponsive. The emergency power cutoff did nothing. The screens just kept scrolling, and that hum kept building, growing louder until it wasn't just sound anymore. It was vibration. I could feel it in my teeth, in my bones. Then it stopped. Every screen went black. Every speaker went silent. The only light came from the emergency LEDs along the baseboards. We stood there in the darkness, breathing hard, waiting for something else to happen. Ryan moved to reboot the main server. I stopped him. Something felt wrong. The air in the room was different. Heavier, like the pressure had changed. One of the climate scientists, a woman named Dr. Sarah Voss, pointed at the main monitor. It had turned back on. Just that one screen. And displayed on it was a single line of text. In English this time. We are older than your ice. I felt my stomach drop. Someone was messing with us. Had to be. Some kind of hack. Maybe a rival research team playing a prank. But the station's network was isolated. No outside connections. No way for anyone to access our systems remotely. And that text, those words, they felt deliberate, precise, like whoever wrote them had thought very carefully about what to say. Sarah wanted to call for evacuation immediately. But our satellite phone was in the main building, and none of us wanted to go back outside. Not in the dark, not with that feeling in the air. So we stayed in the data lab, watching that message on the screen, trying to convince ourselves it was just a glitch. By morning, the drill hole had frozen solid. Not a thin layer of ice. Completely sealed, like it had never been there. I spent 2 hours with a thermal probe trying to find where we had drilled. The ice was smooth, unbroken. The GPS coordinates were right. The equipment was still set up around the location. But the hole was gone. Underneath the drill site, I found something else. Patterns in the ice. Geometric shapes that definitely weren't natural. They spread out from where the hole had been, forming a web of lines and angles that covered an area about 50 feet across. When I looked at them too long, my vision started to blur. The patterns seemed to shift, to rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. We tried drilling again in a different location. The equipment wouldn't start. Every drill bit snapped within seconds of contact with the ice. The computer controls were reprogrammed again, this time displaying those strange symbols continuously. The message was clear. We weren't welcome to dig anymore. That afternoon, I went back to examine the core sample we had extracted. The piece we had kept in cold storage for analysis. When I opened the container, it was empty. The ice had sublimated completely, turned directly from solid to vapor without leaving any water behind. But the container was sealed. There was nowhere for the vapor to go. It should have been impossible. On the table where the ice had been, I found marks. Etched into the metal surface. More of those angular symbols. And beneath them, in English again, a new message. You woke us. Now you must listen. The temperature in the storage unit dropped 20 degrees in under a minute. My breath came out in thick clouds. Frost formed on every surface, spreading in those same geometric patterns. I backed toward the door and found it frozen shut. The handle wouldn't turn. Ice had formed in the mechanism, locking me inside. I was trapped in a room that was getting colder by the second with a message from something that shouldn't exist telling me to listen. So I listened. At first, there was nothing, just the hum of the refrigeration unit and my own panicked breathing. Then I heard it, that same hum from the computers, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Not from speakers, from the ice itself, the walls, the floor, the air, and underneath the hum, something else. A voice? Not speaking. Not exactly. More like thoughts pressed directly into my mind. Concepts without words. Images without vision. I understood things I shouldn't have been able to understand. The thing beneath the ice was old. Older than the glaciers. Older than the land itself. It existed in the permafrost the way we exist in air. Spread out across miles. Across centuries. Conscious in a way that made our definition of consciousness seem crude and limited. It had been dormant for 50,000 years. Waiting. Growing. Learning from every frozen thing that sank into the earth above it. We had drilled into its mind. The ice we extracted was a part of it. A small part, but enough to wake it. Enough to make it aware of us. Of our machines and our science and our belief that we understood the world we were studying. It found us amusing. Our efforts to categorize and measure something that existed on a scale we couldn't comprehend. But it also found us threatening. Because we were warm. Because we melted ice. Because everywhere we went, we brought heat and change and the end of frozen places. And this thing, this presence in the permafrost, had spent millennia perfecting the art of cold, of preservation, of keeping things exactly as they were. It wanted us to leave, to take our drills and our heaters and our ambitions somewhere else, to let it sleep again. And if we didn't, to leave willingly, it would make us leave. It would freeze us into the landscape the way it had frozen countless other things over the eons. Turn us into part of the permafrost, part of itself. The door opened. I stumbled out into the compound, gasping. The other researchers were gathered outside, staring at the lake. The water was freezing. Not the normal skim ice that forms in autumn. Solid, deep, spreading from the shore outward in those same geometric patterns. By the time I reached them, half the lake was frozen solid. We packed that night, didn't even try to salvage the equipment. Just grabbed our personal gear and the emergency supplies and started hiking toward the access road 15 miles south. The snow had started falling. Heavy, thick, the kind of snow that erases trails and landmarks. The kind that turns the world into white nothing. We made it 8 miles before Sarah collapsed. Hypothermia. We got her into a sleeping bag, started a fire with our emergency fuel. But the fire wouldn't stay lit. The flames kept dying. The cold was too intense. Unnatural. Like something was actively fighting against any source of heat. I knew then that we weren't gonna make it. Not all of us. The thing in the permafrost was hunting us now. Slowly, patiently. The way cold always hunts. Inevitable and thorough. I am writing this on my phone while I still can. The battery is at 12% and dropping fast despite being fully charged an hour ago. The cold is draining everything. Power, heat, hope. The others are asleep or unconscious. I can't tell anymore. The snow has buried our camp. We're in a white tomb getting smaller by the hour. If you rereading this, you need to understand something. The Arctic ISN, empty. It ISN, dead. There are things in the ice that have been waiting longer than we can imagine. Things that don't think like us or live like us or care about us except as threats to be eliminated or curiosities to be studied. We thought we were studying the permafrost. We were wrong. It was studying us, learning our language, understanding our technology, preparing for the day when the ice melts and whatever is down there wakes up fully. That day is coming. The climate is changing. The permafrost is thawing. And when it does, when the ancient cold finally surrenders to the modern heat, something is going to emerge. Something that has spent 50,000 years frozen in place, conscious and dreaming and planning. The pulse is still there. I can feel it through the snow, through the ground, one beat every 8 seconds. The heartbeat of something vast and patient and utterly alien. It's all around us now. In every snowflake, every frozen breath. We woke it up, and it is not going back to sleep. Story 2. Last broadcast of KBKRAM, the human mind was not designed to process certain sounds. Frequencies that existed before language, before music, before we crawled out of caves and decided we were the dominant species on this planet. I know this now because I heard them. Because they are still playing in my head, even though the source has been dead for 47 years. I bought a house in Naknek, Alaska last spring. A foreclosure. Cheap. The kind of deal that makes you wonder what is wrong with it before you even walk through the door. But I needed a fresh start after the divorce, and the remote location felt right. No neighbors, no memories, just me and the wind in the endless gray sky over Bristol Bay. The previous owner had left everything behind. Furniture, clothes, even personal items like photographs and books. The realtor said the family wanted nothing from the house, that they had abandoned it years ago and never looked back. I should have asked why. Should have pressed for details. But I was too focused on the price and the isolation to care about red flags. It was in the basement where I found the recordings. Dozens of reel-to-reel tapes in boxes marked with dates from 1978. Each one labeled in careful handwriting. March 7th, March 14th, March 21st, all the way through April. Next to the boxes was an old tape player. The kind radio stations used back in the day. Heavy and industrial. Built to last. I am not sure why I decided to play them. Curiosity, maybe. Or boredom. The Alaska winter is long and dark, and I had run out of podcasts to listen to. I threaded the first tape onto the machine. March 7th, hit play, and heard a voice I would come to know too well. Good evening, Naknek. This is John Mercer with your overnight programming on KBKRAM, your voice of Bristol Bay. We've got a great night lined up. Some classic rock, some local news, and later we will take your call and requests. But first, let me tell you about the weather. His voice was smooth, professional, the kind of radio voice that made you feel like you were listening to a friend. He talked about a storm coming in from the Bering Sea, about fishing reports and high school basketball scores. Normal small-town radio, nothing unusual. Then, about 20 minutes into the broadcast, something changed. A sound bled into the background. Faint at first, like static, but not quite static. It had a rhythm, a pattern, almost like chanting. John kept talking. Kept reading his weather reports and introducing songs. But the sound grew louder, more insistent, and his voice started to change. The smooth professionalism cracked. He stumbled over words, repeated phrases, then he stopped mid-sentence. The chanting took over, deep and guttural. Voices layered on top of voices. Singing in a language I did not recognize, but that felt old. Ancient. The kind of sounds that make your chest tight and your skin crawl. It went on for 3 minutes. Then John came back on the air. If you are hearing this, you need to understand. They are not gone. They were never gone. They are in the frequency. In the wavelength, waiting for someone to tune in. The tape ended. I sat in the basement with my heart pounding, staring at the machine. Part of me wanted to stop, to pack those tapes back in their boxes and forget I ever found them. But I needed to know what happened, needed to understand what I had just heard. I loaded the next tape, March 14th. 1 week later, John sounded different right from the start. Tired, strained. He talked about the station receiving complaints. People calling in to report strange interference. Voices in their radios speaking words they could not understand. Some listeners said the sounds made them nauseous. Others reported headaches, nosebleeds. One woman claimed her husband had a seizure while listening. John tried to reassure them, told them it was just atmospheric interference, solar activity, nothing to worry about, but I could hear the lie in his voice. He knew it was something else. Halfway through the broadcast, the chanting started again, louder this time, more aggressive. It drowned out John completely for nearly 10 minutes. When his voice finally came back, it was barely a whisper. I see them now, in the sound waves, in the empty spaces between words, faces that are not faces, shapes that hurt to look at. They want out. They want to be heard. I stopped the tape. My hands were shaking. The basement felt colder, darker. I could hear the wind outside rattling the windows, but underneath it, I swear I could hear something else. A faint echo of that chanting, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. I should have stopped, should have burned those tapes and never thought about them again. But I was already hooked, already infected by the need to know. Over the next week, I listened to every recording, watched John Mercer's slow descent into madness. Each broadcast grew more disturbed, more fragmented. The chanting became a constant presence. Sometimes it would fade into the background. Other times it would surge forward, obliterating everything else. And John kept trying to explain it, kept trying to make sense of what was happening. On March 28th, he played a recording he claimed to have made in the studio. Just the microphone running. No music, no speech, just silence, except it was not silent. The chanting was there, captured on tape, present in the empty air. He started talking about the indigenous people who had lived in the region for thousands of years. About their stories of spirits and voices in the wind. About shamans who could speak to things that existed beyond the normal world. He read passages from anthropology books, described rituals meant to keep certain entities contained, locked away in the spaces between reality. And then he said something that made my blood run cold. The station is built on an old site, a place where the awakens used to perform ceremonies, where they would sing to keep something asleep, keep it from waking up and spreading. But we did not know. We just saw cheap land and built our transmitter. And now we are broadcasting on their frequency, the one that used to contain it. And every time I turn on this microphone, I am letting it out. The final tape was dated April 4th, 1978. I almost did not play it. Almost packed everything away and tried to forget. But I had come this far. I needed to hear the end. The broadcast started with silence. 30 seconds of dead air. Then John began speaking. His voice was calm now. Too calm, like he had moved past fear into acceptance. To anyone listening, to anyone who finds these recordings, do not try to understand the sounds. Do not try to translate the words. They are not meant for human minds. They are instructions, blueprints, patterns that rewrite the way you think, the way you perceive reality. Once you hear them, really hear them, you become a carrier, a vessel. You spread the frequency just by existing. The chanting started, but this time it was different, clearer, more focused. I could almost make out individual words, almost understand the meaning. And as I listened, something in my head clicked, like a lock turning, like a door opening. I understood, not the words, but the purpose. These sounds were a map, a guide, instructions for how to tune into something that existed outside our normal senses. Something vast and hungry and patient. Something that had been waiting for thousands of years for someone to open the channel again. John kept talking, kept explaining in that too calm voice. I have been transcribing the patterns, writing down the symbols I see when I close my eyes. They want to be recorded, want to be preserved, want to spread. The symbols are the key. Anyone who reads them will hear the sounds, will become part of the broadcast, part of the signal. Then came the sound of movement, rustling, the scrape of a chair, and John describing what he was doing in real time, taking tape from the machine, pulling it out in long strips, pushing it into his ears, deeper and deeper. blocking out the physical sound but unable to block out what was already inside his head. The broadcast ended with him humming the chant, his voice distorted by the tape stuffed in his ears. And underneath it all, that ancient rhythm, that prehistoric frequency, pulsing like a heartbeat. I found the newspaper articles the next day, searched online for any information about KBKR-AM, about John Mercer, about what happened on April 4th, 1978. The station had been shut down. Immediately, permanently. John had been found in the broadcast booth, alive but unresponsive, tape packed into his ears so deeply they had to surgically remove it, and covering every surface of the booth, every wall, every inch of the floor and ceiling, symbols, hundreds of them, thousands, all drawn in marker and pen in his own blood, intricate patterns that made the investigators sick just looking at them. John had been institutionalized, died in 1995 without ever speaking again. The building had been demolished, the land declared contaminated, not environmentally, not chemically, just contaminated. The official reports were vague, recommended against any new construction, warned about persistent psychological effects in the area. And here I was, living a quarter mile from where it all happened, in a house that had belonged to someone who probably found the same tapes, who probably listened to the same broadcasts, who abandoned everything and fled. I tried to burn the tapes that night, took them out to the yard, doused them in lighter fluid, but I could not make myself light the match, because the chanting was already in my head, already part of me. Destroying the tapes would not change that, would not undo what I had heard. Instead, I found myself threading a new tape into the machine. Blank, fresh, and hitting record. My voice came out steady, calm, just like John's had been on that final broadcast. I started describing the symbols, the patterns I could see when I closed my eyes. My hand moved on its own, drawing on paper, on the walls, making marks that felt right even though I did not understand them. Could not understand them. Not with the part of my mind that still thought in words and logic. The chanting is always playing now, even when the house is silent, even when I am trying to sleep. It is there, underneath everything, a frequency that has nothing to do with sound waves or radio signals. It is older than that, deeper than that, and it is not just in my head. It is in the ground here, in the air, in the fabric of reality itself. I knew. Their ancestors knew. That is why they sang, why they performed ceremonies. Not to worship it, but to contain it, to keep it locked in a frequency that human ears could not normally perceive. But we built a transmitter. We amplified the signal. We broadcast it out into the world. And now it is awake. Now it knows there are millions of ears out there. Millions of minds ready to be tuned in. I have been uploading the recordings, sharing them online. Not because I want to, but because I need to. Because that is what the frequency wants. That is what it has always wanted. To spread, to propagate. To find new vessels, you need to understand something. If you have listened this far, if you have heard even a fraction of what I describe, it is already too late. The pattern is forming in your mind right now. The door is opening. You are becoming part of the broadcast, part of the signal. And the worst part is not the chanting, not the symbols, not even the slow dissolution of your sense of self as the frequency rewrites your thoughts. The worst part is knowing that this is just the beginning, that you are now a transmitter, that everyone you speak to, everyone you interact with, is being exposed, is being tuned in. The frequency does not need radio stations anymore. It does not need tape recorders or transmitters. It has us, billions of us, all connected, all broadcasting, all spreading the signal further and further until there is nowhere left that has not been touched by the sound. John Mercer understood this at the end. That is why he stuffed his ears, not to block out the chanting, but to stop himself from speaking it aloud, from breathing it into the air, from spreading it any further. But it did not matter. He had already transcribed the symbols, already created a map that others would find, that I would find. I am transcribing them now, the symbols, the patterns, writing them down just like he did. Not because I want to, but because I have to, because that is what you do when you become part of the broadcast. You preserve the signal, you pass it on, and you are next. Everyone who hears this is next. The frequency is patient. It has been waiting for thousands of years. It can wait a little longer, until the signal reaches critical mass, until enough minds have been tuned in, until the door opens wide enough for something vast and ancient and utterly alien to finally step through. Listen carefully. Do you hear it? Underneath my words, underneath the silence, that faint rhythm, that prehistoric pulse, that is the sound of something waking up. And we are the ones who woke it. We are the last broadcast, and the signal never ends. Story 3. Faces in the wood. The totem pole had my brother, his face carved into it, and he had 3 days left to live. I am telling you this because someone needs to know what happens in Ketchikan when the woods starts changing. My name is Jake Morrison. I am a charter boat captain, been running fishing tours out of Southeast Alaska for 12 years. I know these waters, I know this town, and I know that the totems in Totem Bight State Park are not what the tourists think they are. Most people see them as art, history, 1930s replicas of native clan houses and poles, built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. Beautiful carvings of ravens and bears and eagles. The guidebooks call them cultural treasures. They don't mention that the faces change, that new eyes appear in the wood overnight, that the poles remember things they shouldn't to be able to remember. I first noticed it 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday morning in late September. I was taking a couple from Wisconsin out to the park before their fishing trip. Standard tourist stop. We walked the path through the forest, looking at the poles standing there among the spruce and hemlock. The couple was taking photos, asking the usual questions about symbolism and meaning. That is when I saw the face. It was carved into the base of a thunderbird pole, just above the ground. A human face, not stylized like the traditional designs. Realistic, detailed. The features were sharp and clear, and I recognized them immediately. Tom Schaefer. He ran the hardware store on Main Street. First had bought marine supplies from him for years. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember if that face had always been there. The tourists moved on. I stayed. The longer I looked, the more certain I became. This was new. This hadn't been here last week when I brought another group through. Tom Schaefer died that Friday. Heart attack behind the counter of his store. 48 years old. No history of heart problems. He just collapsed while ringing up a sale and never got back up. I went back to the park the day after his funeral. The face was gone. Smooth wood where his features had been, like it had never existed. 2 days later, I found another face, this time on a tall raven pole near the clan house. An old woman. I didn't recognize her immediately, but something about the carving made my skin crawl. The detail was too perfect, the expression too specific. She looked afraid. I started asking around town, showed people photos I had taken. An older fisherman named Pete looked at the image and went pale. He told me it was Margaret Keene. She lived alone up in the hills, rarely came into town anymore. He hadn't seen her in weeks. They found her body on Sunday. She had fallen down her stairs and broken her neck. The coroner said she had been dead for days. That is when I understood. The totems were showing us who was going to die, carving their faces into the wood as a warning or a promise or something worse. Something I didn't want to think about. I started checking the park every morning, walking the paths, examining every pole, looking for new faces. Most days there was nothing. The totems stood silent and still, their traditional designs unchanged. But once or twice a week, I would find someone, a new carving, a new warning, a teenager who would die in a car accident on the highway to Ward Cove, an old man who would have a stroke while gardening, a woman who would overdose in her apartment downtown. Every face I found, every person I recognized, they were gone within a week. I tried warning people, I really did. I called Margaret Keene, this number a dozen times before they found her. No answer. I tracked down the teenager, his parents, and told them to keep their son off the roads. They looked at me like I was insane. How could I explain it? How could I tell them their son's face was carved into a piece of wood in a state park and that meant he was going to die? I couldn't. So I stopped trying. I just watched and waited and marked the days between the appearance of the face and the inevitable death that followed. Then I found my brother. It was a Thursday morning, early October. The rain was coming down hard, turning the forest paths into streams of mud. I almost didn't go to the park that day, but something pulled me there. Some instinct or dread or need to know. Michael's face was carved into the chest of a bare pole, right where the heart would be. His expression was calm, almost peaceful, but his eyes, God, his eyes looked terrified. I ran to my truck and drove straight to his house. He was there, alive, drinking coffee in his kitchen, working from home like he did most days. He was a software developer. Spent most of his time on video calls with clients in Seattle. Safe, healthy, 39 years old with no health problems. I told him everything. About the faces, about the deaths, about what I had seen in the park. He listened quietly, his coffee getting cold in his hands. When I finished, he set the cup down and asked me if I had been drinking, if I was stressed, if maybe I needed to see someone. I showed him the photos on my phone, all the faces I had documented over the past 3 weeks. He looked through them slowly, his expression getting more serious with each image. Then he handed the phone back and said something that made my blood run cold. He told me he had been having dreams for the past 2 weeks. Dreams where he was standing in the forest surrounded by totem poles. In the dreams, the poles would move, turn their carved heads to look at him, open their wooden mouths and whisper things he couldn't quite hear. He would wake up with splinters under his fingernails, wood shavings in his bed. I asked him if he knew what the poles were saying. He shook his head, but I could see in his eyes that he was lying. He knew, he just didn't want to tell me. I stayed with him that day, and the next, watching him, making sure he didn't leave the house, making sure nothing happened. But I couldn't stay forever. I had charters booked, bills to pay. On Saturday morning, I left him alone for 4 hours to take a group out fishing. When I came back, he was gone. I found his truck still in the driveway, his phone on the kitchen counter, his wallet and keys untouched. But Michael was nowhere in the house. I called the police, filed a missing person report. They searched for 2 days, used dogs, checked the woods around his property, dragged the creek behind his house. Nothing. On Tuesday morning, I went back to the park. Do you know why? Maybe I thought I would find answers there. Maybe I just needed to see if the face was still there. If the warning was still active, the bear pole was different. Michael's face had changed. The expression was no longer calm. Now it looked like he was screaming, and below his face, carved into the belly of the bear, were words. Fresh cuts in the wood, still oozing sap. He came when called, as they all do, as you will. I touched the carving and the wood was warm. Not from the sun, from something inside. I could feel it pulsing under my fingers. Like a heartbeat, like something alive was trapped beneath the surface. That is when I heard the sound. A tapping, rhythmic, coming from inside the pole. I pressed my ear against the wood and heard it clearly. Someone knocking, trapped inside the totem, begging to be let out. I grabbed a rock and started hitting the pole, trying to break through, trying to free whoever was inside. The wood didn't crack, didn't even dent. It just absorbed the impacts, and that knocking continued, getting more frantic, more desperate. I heard my brother, his voice from inside the wood, muffled, distant, calling my name. I ran. I am not proud of it, but I ran back to my truck and drove home and locked every door and closed every window. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, trying to process what I had heard, trying to find some rational explanation. There wasn't. T1. The totems weren't predicting deaths. They were causing them, taking people, pulling them into the woods somehow and keeping them there. All those faces I had seen over the past weeks, all those people who had died, they weren't warnings. They were trophies. I went to the police, told them everything. They humored me, sent a patrol car to the park. The officer came back and said all the totems looked normal. No new carvings, no signs of anything unusual. He suggested I talk to someone, get some rest. Grief does strange things to people, he said. I went back that night, alone, armed with a chainsaw and a flashlight. I was going to cut my brother out of that pole. I was going to free him and anyone else trapped in there. I didn't care if I got arrested. I didn't care if people thought I was crazy. But when I got to the park, all the poles were facing the entrance, turned toward me, watching, and carved into the base of the Thunderbird pole, right where I would see it first, was a new face. Mine. My own features staring back at me from the wood. My expression was blank, empty, like I was already dead inside. I dropped the chainsaw and backed away slowly. The forest around me felt different, alive in a way it shouldn't be. The trees seemed closer, the darkness between them deeper. I could hear whispers, not words, just sounds, like dozens of voices trying to speak through wood. I ran again, got in my truck, drove straight out of Ketchikan. I am in Juneau now, 300 miles away, but I can still feel it. That pole, like something's calling me back, like the totems aren't finished with me yet. The guidebooks don't tell you that the faces change. They don't mention that the totems are hungry, that they've been standing there for decades, waiting, collecting, taking people piece by piece and storing them in the wood where no one can find them. My brother is still there, trapped inside the bear pole, knocking, screaming, waiting for someone to hear him, and my face is carved at the entrance. A promise. A claim. I don't know how much time I have left. Maybe days, maybe hours. The wood remembers. The totems remember. And when they carve your face, they own you. Eventually, you hear the call. Eventually, you go back. You have to. It's not a choice anymore. If you ever in Ketchikan, don't to go to Totem Bite State Park at night. Don't to touch the poles. Don't to look too closely at the carvings. And if you see a face you recognize, Someone, staring out from the wood. Dawn, to investigate. Dawn, to try to help. Just leave. Get as far away as you can. Because once the totems notice you, once they carve your face into their wood, you belong to them. And sooner or later, everyone goes home. Story 4. Lake of Bones. The skeletons were all looking north. And that is what made me understand they had been running from something. I am a bush pilot. Have been for 8 years now, flying supplies and researchers across the Brooks Range in northern Alaska. I've seen a lot of remote places, a lot of strange things that happen when you hundreds of miles from civilization. But nothing prepared me for what I found at the lake the Inupiat people call Nunamiktuq. The Lake of Bones. It started with a routine supply drop in early July. A geology team studying mineral deposits had set up camp near an unnamed lake about 60 miles north of Naknek Pass. They radioed for an emergency extraction. No explanation. Just 3 words repeated over and over. Get us out. I flew in the next morning. The weather was clear, unusual for that time of year. From the air, I could see their camp. 2 tents, equipment scattered around, no people visible. I circled lower, looking for a safe place to land my float plane on the lake. That is when I saw them. The ice had melted early that summer. Climate change pushing the thaw further into areas that used to stay frozen year-round. And beneath the crystal clear water, covering the entire lake bed like a carpet, were bones. Human bones. Hundreds of skeletons lying in the shallow water, perfectly preserved by the cold. All of them positioned the same way, all facing north, all with their arms stretched forward like they had been reaching for something or running toward something in their final moments. I landed the plane on the south end of the lake, as far from that underwater graveyard as I could manage. The water was only about 4 feet deep at most, clear enough that I could see every detail of the skeletons below. Some were ancient, the bones darkened and cracked. Others looked newer, cleaner, and a few looked like they could have been from last year. The geology team was gone. Their tents were empty, food still in the coolers, sleeping bags laid out like they had just stepped away for a moment. But their boots were still there, all 3 pairs, lined up neatly outside the tent entrance. No one walks around the Arctic without boots. I called out. My voice echoed across the water and died in the hills beyond. Nothing answered. I checked their equipment. Laptops still powered on, screens showing data I didn't understand. A notebook open to a page with a single sentence written over and over in increasingly frantic handwriting. They only move at night. I should have left right then. Should have gotten back in my plane and reported this to the authorities. But something made me stay. Some need to understand what had happened here, what was still happening. I set up a camp on the shore, away from the tents. As the sun moved lower in the sky, I noticed something strange about the lake. The water was getting darker, not from shadows, from something rising up from the depths. A cloud of sediment or disturbed organic matter turning the crystal clear water murky and opaque. By the time night fell, I couldn't see the bottom anymore. Couldn't see the skeletons. The lake had become a black mirror reflecting the stars above. I built a fire and sat watching the water. The Arctic summer meant it never got fully dark. Just a gray twilight that lasted all night. In that dim light, I saw movement. Not in the water, shapes shifting beneath the surface, gliding through the murk like pale shadows. I told myself it was fish. Arctic char maybe, but fish done to move in formation. Done to circle a shoreline with purpose and intelligence. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the sound. A wet dragging noise, something heavy being pulled across mud. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it at the water. Its edge. The beam caught something white pulling itself onto the shore about 50 feet from my camp. It was a skeleton, walking, dragging its lower half because the leg bones weren't properly connected anymore. Water streamed off the ancient bones as it crawled forward. Its skull turned toward me, empty eye sockets somehow seeing. Its jaw hung open in a permanent scream. I ran, just ran into the darkness away from the lake. Behind me, I heard more dragging sounds, more splashing. The skeletons were coming out of the water. All of them, hundreds of them pulling themselves onto shore and moving north. Always north. I hid behind a boulder and watched them pass. An army of the dead marching through the Arctic night. Some were almost complete. Others were just fragments held together by something invisible. Something that refused to let them rest. They ignored me completely. Didn't even turn their heads. They just kept moving north with that same desperate reaching motion. Like they were still trying to escape something. Still running after all these years. I waited until dawn. until the last skeleton had crawled past and disappeared into the hills. Then I went back to the lake. The water was clear again, and the lake bed was empty. Every single bone was gone. I searched the area where the geology team had camped, found their day packs hidden under one of the cots. Inside were journals, research notes, and photographs that made my hands shake. They had been here for 2 weeks, long enough to notice the pattern. The skeletons emerged every night, walked north, returned before dawn. Always the same route, always the same desperate march. The team had tried to follow them one night. The last entry in the lead researcher's journal described what they found. 5 miles north of the lake, there was a valley, a deep crack in the earth that shouldn't exist according to any geological survey. The skeletons walked to the edge of this valley and threw themselves in. One by one, hundreds of them plunging into darkness. But they always came back, crawling out of the valley before sunrise, dragging themselves back to the lake, sinking beneath the water to wait for the next night. The journal entry ended with a single line. We heard singing from the valley. Something is calling them. Something is calling us. I found the valley that afternoon. Had to see what could make the dead walk. What could trap them in an endless loop of death and return. The crack in the earth was exactly where the journal described. About 30 feet wide, impossibly deep. I threw a rock in and never heard it hit bottom. The walls were smooth, too smooth, like they had been melted rather than fractured. And I heard it, the singing. Not words, not any language, just a sound that vibrated in my chest and made my teeth ache. It came from deep below, from somewhere that shouldn't be reachable. It was beautiful and terrible, and I wanted to jump. I wanted to throw myself into that darkness more than I had ever wanted anything. My legs moved toward the edge. My mind was screaming, but my body didn't care. Whatever was down there was calling, and part of me needed to answer. I fell, not into the valley, away from it, backward onto the rocky ground. The impact knocked the breath out of me and broke whatever hold that singing had on my mind. I crawled away, not looking back, until I couldn't hear it anymore. I made it back to the lake as the sun was setting. The water was already turning dark, already hiding what lay beneath. I got in my plane and started the engine. Took off without doing any safety checks, without following any protocol, just got into the air and flew south as fast as the plane would go. I reported the missing geology team. Search and rescue found nothing. No bodies, no evidence of what happened. The official report said they probably fell through thin ice, even though it was the middle of summer. Even though there was no thin ice. I never went back, but I looked into the history of that area, found references in old and Nunamiktuq oral histories, stories about a place where the dead dawn to rest, where something beneath the earth calls to the living and the dead alike. A place where the boundary between worlds is thin. The story said that once, a long time ago, a shaman tried to close the valley, tried to seal whatever was calling from below. He succeeded, but at a cost. Everyone in his village walked into the valley that night. Every man, woman, and child. They threw themselves in, answering the call their shaman had tried to silence. Their bodies were never recovered, but their bones crawled back, returned to the lake where the village had been. And every night since, they walk north, still trying to answer, still trying to reach whatever is calling from beneath the earth. I see them sometimes in my dreams, walking, always walking north, and I wake up with my feet on the floor, with my boots on, with my hand on the door handle, ready to walk, ready to answer, because I heard the singing. And once you hear it, it never really stops. It's always there, always calling, waiting for the night when you retired enough or weak enough or lonely enough to listen. The Nunamiktuq have a saying about the Lake of Bones. They tell their children never to camp near it, never to look at the water after dark, because the dead are envious of the living, and the thing in the valley is always hungry. I live in Fairbanks now, as far south as I could get while still staying in Alaska. But it doesn't matter. Distance doesn't matter. The singing reaches everywhere eventually, and every night, I feel the pull a little stronger, the need to walk north, to return to that valley, to finally answer the call. I am writing this because someone needs to know. If I disappear, if they find my bones in that lake facing north with all the others, someone needs to understand why. I didn't want to go. I fought it, but the singing doesn't stop, and sooner or later, everyone who hears it walks. The skeletons in the Lake of Bones aren't a mystery. They rue warning. Everyone who came before, everyone who heard the call and couldn't resist. And soon, I'll be one of them, walking north through the Arctic night, reaching for something I'll never touch. answering a question I'll never understand. The lake is waiting, the valley is waiting, and whatever sings from below is patient. It has all the time in the world. And eventually, we all walk north. Story 5. Mirror sickness. The first person who smashed every mirror in their house was my neighbor, and I watched him do it from my kitchen window. This was Fairbanks, Alaska, February 1975, the kind of cold that makes your lungs ache when you breathe. I had moved to the Valley View suburb 6 months earlier for a job at the pipeline, and everything had been normal until that Tuesday morning when I saw Jim Peterson standing in his driveway with a baseball bat, methodically destroying the side mirrors on his truck. He moved with purpose, not rage, just cold, systematic destruction. When he finished with the truck, he went back inside. Through his living room window, I could see him swinging at something. Glass exploded outward, catching the weak February sunlight. I should have called someone, should have checked on him, but something about the way he moved stopped me, like he was doing something necessary, something that made perfect sense to him. By that afternoon, 3 more houses on our street had covered their windows with sheets and blankets. The sickness, as people started calling it, began so quietly that most of us missed the early signs. It started with Janet Miller, a school teacher who lived 2 blocks over. She stopped coming to work. When her principal did a welfare check, they found her sitting in a completely dark house, every reflective surface covered with towels and duct tape. She kept saying her reflection was watching her wrong, that it was moving a half second off, that it was learning. The doctors called it a psychiatric break, stress-induced psychosis. They sedated her and kept her for observation. But then others started reporting the same thing. By the end of that first week, 11 people in Valley View had covered their mirrors. The local paper ran a small story about a possible shared delusion, maybe something in the water supply or a gas leak causing mass hallucinations. The city tested everything, found nothing wrong. I thought I was immune to whatever was happening. I went about my routine, brushed my teeth in front of the bathroom mirror every morning, checked my appearance before work. Normal things. My reflection did exactly what reflections are supposed to do. It mimicked me perfectly, until it didn't. The first time I noticed was small. So small I almost dismissed it. I was shaving, running the razor down my jaw, when I caught my reflection, its eyes in the mirror. They were looking at something to my left, but I was looking straight ahead. For just a fraction of a second, maybe less, my reflection, this gaze was independent. I turned quickly, checking what it had been looking at. Nothing there, just my empty hallway. When I looked back at the mirror, everything was normal again. Synchronized. I convinced myself it was fatigue, the long winter darkness playing tricks. Fairbanks in February only gets about 5 hours of weak daylight. The rest is darkness and that strange twilight that never quite commits to either day or night. But I started paying attention after that, really watching my reflection. And once you start looking for the delays, you see them everywhere. A blink that comes a millisecond late. A smile that holds a fraction too long after yours fades. Fingers that flex independently when your hands are still. Tiny discrepancies, barely noticeable. But the thing about reflections is that we trust them completely. We use them dozens of times a day and never question what we see. We're supposed to be perfect copies. Instant and exact. When that fundamental rule breaks down, even slightly, it creates this deep, instinctive wrongness that is hard to describe. I started limiting my mirror use. Quick glances only. Done. To stare too long. Done. To give it time to drift off sync. But the sickness was spreading beyond mirrors now, just like it had with the others. I first noticed it in a puddle outside the grocery store. A sheet of ice melt water. Perfectly still. I happened to glance down as I walked past and saw my reflection looking back up at me. But its head was turned slightly, watching me walk away. I stopped and looked again. Normal now, perfectly matched. My hands started shaking. I dropped my groceries in the parking lot and sat in my truck for 20 minutes, trying to rationalize what I had seen. That night, I covered my bathroom mirror with a bedsheet. Just temporarily, I told myself. Just until I could get more sleep and shake off whatever this was. But covering it made things worse. Because then I started thinking about what the reflection was doing behind that sheet. If it was still there, still moving, still watching, learning my patterns, my routines, my life, the paranoia that came with the sickness was the worst part. It infected everything. Every shiny surface became a potential window to something that was studying you. Learning to be you. The chrome on my truck fender. The dark screen of my turned-off television. The polished metal of my belt buckle. Any surface that could hold even a distorted reflection became suspect. I learned that others were experiencing escalations too. Jim Peterson, my neighbor, had stopped leaving his house entirely. Someone else had been found trying to sand down the finish on their car with a brick, desperate to remove any reflective surface. The police were getting calls daily about people destroying property, always their own, always targeting anything that could show a reflection. The city tried to respond rationally. They brought in psychiatrists from Anchorage, specialists in mass hysteria and shared delusions. But how do you treat something when the patients insist they were not delusional? When they can describe, in perfect detail, the exact ways their reflections are becoming independent? I started documenting what I saw, keeping a journal of every incident. Every time my reflection moved wrong, the delays were getting longer, more obvious. One morning, I raised my hand to scratch my head, and my reflection waited a full second before mimicking the action. One entire second. That's an eternity when you re-watching yourself. And its expressions were changing too. Subtle shifts that didn't match my mood. I would be tired, dead-eyed from another sleepless night, but my reflection would have this alertness, this focus, like something behind my eyes was very, very awake. The breaking point came 3 weeks after Jim destroyed his mirrors. I was driving home from work in the dark, exhausted and paranoid, when I glanced at my rearview mirror to check the road behind me. The reflection showed my face clearly in the dim light of the dashboard, and it smiled at me. I wasn't smiling. I was terrified and tired and barely holding together. But my reflection smiled, wide and genuine, like it was happy about something I couldn't understand. I jerked the wheel and pulled over, my heart hammering. Sat there on the side of the park's highway with my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. The rearview mirror hung there, angled perfectly to show my face. I was crying now, tears running down my cheeks. My reflection wasn't crying. It was still smiling, just slightly, just enough. I ripped the mirror off the windshield with my bare hands. The plastic mount snapped and cut my palm, but I didn't care. I threw it out the window into a snowbank and drove the rest of the way home without looking at any reflective surface. That night, I covered every mirror, every window, every piece of glass or metal that could possibly show a reflection. My house became a cave, dark and sealed, but it didn't help, because the sickness had moved beyond external reflections now. I started seeing it in my mind. When I closed my eyes, I could picture my reflection perfectly. Could see it moving through my daily routine, but slightly wrong, slightly off, going through the motions of my life but with different intentions, different thoughts. The theory that started circulating through Valley View was worse than any explanation the doctors offered. Someone, I don't remember who, suggested that maybe our reflections had always been separate, that they had always been watching and learning. And something about Fairbanks in deep winter, about the darkness and the cold and the isolation, had weakened whatever barrier kept them synchronized. Let them slip out of perfect mimicry for just moments at a time. Which meant they had been practicing. For our entire lives, every time we looked in a mirror, they were there, watching, learning our expressions, our gestures, our patterns, building a perfect copy of who we were, learning to replace us. I know how that sounds. I know it's insane. But when you were in the middle of it, when you've seen your own face smile back at you with nothing behind the eyes, sanity becomes a luxury you can afford. The sickness peaked in March. By then, 47 people in Valley View had reported symptoms. The national news picked it up, called it mass psychosis induced by seasonal affective disorder and isolation. They sent more doctors, more psychiatrists. They wanted to study us, understand how a shared delusion could spread so completely through a community. But they stopped asking questions after what happened to Dr. Reese. He was one of the specialists from Anchorage. Young, confident, certain he could explain everything with science and psychology. He did interviews with affected residents, took notes, developed theories. I remember him telling me that the human brain was wired to find patterns, to see agency and intention even in random events. That we were all experiencing a feedback loop of shared anxiety manifesting as perceptual distortions. They found him in his hotel room 3 days later. He had covered every surface with newspaper and turned all the furniture to face the walls. In his notebook, his entries had become increasingly erratic. The last page just said, repeated hundreds of times in increasingly shaky handwriting. It knows what I know now. It knows what I know now. It knows what I know now. He had used a permanent marker to black out his own eyes in every photograph in his wallet. After that, the outside doctors stopped coming. Valley View was quarantined. Not officially, but effectively. People stopped moving here. Existing residents left in the night, abandoning houses rather than face another winter. The ones who stayed were either too stubborn or too infected to leave. I stayed because I didn't trust my reflection to not follow me. Because I believed, somewhere deep in my paranoid mind, that it was tied to me. That it couldn't exist independently unless I gave it the chance. Unless I looked away long enough for it to step out of the glass and take my place. The sickness never really ended. It just became part of life in Valley View. People adapted, learned to live without mirrors, to avoid puddles and windows, to keep their eyes down and forward. The suburb developed a strange culture around it. No one spoke about reflections directly. We developed workarounds, routines that minimized exposure, but every so often, someone would crack, would look too long at the wrong surface. And you could see it in their eyes afterward. That recognition, that understanding that something behind the glass was learning, getting better, getting ready. I still live in the same house. 49 years later, I am 73 now, and I haven't seen my own face clearly in decades. I shave by feel. I judge my appearance by the reactions of others. I've gotten good at navigating a world without reflections, but sometimes, late at night, I wonder if it worked. If avoiding mirrors and reflective surfaces actually protected me, or if my reflection finally got tired of waiting and learned to exist without being seen. If somewhere in this house, in the covered mirrors and draped windows, my other self is moving independently, living a parallel life in the glass. I wonder if it's gotten better at being me than I am. And the worst part, the thing that keeps me awake, is a question I can't answer. On all those mornings over the past 5 decades when I interacted with other people, when I gone about my day and made decisions and lived my life, was it actually me? Or had my reflection already made the switch? Had it stepped out of the mirror decades ago, and I, the one who's been trapped in the glass all this time, watching someone else live my life? There's no way to know. That's the real sickness, the doubt that never heals. Because if you can, to trust your own reflection, how can you trust that you, really you? Story 6. Phantom City of the Tundra. Have you ever seen something so clearly, so vividly, that you would stake your life on its existence, only to have the world tell you it was never there at all? I have. And the worst part is not that no one believes me. The worst part is that I am starting to doubt myself. Starting to wonder if what I saw that day over the North Slope was real, or if something up there in the endless Arctic sky broke something fundamental inside my brain. I flew cargo planes in Alaska for 12 years. Small operations mostly, medical supplies to remote villages, equipment to oil fields, mail runs to places so isolated they might as well be on another planet. The work was steady, the pay decent, and the solitude suited me fine. After my divorce, after my daughter stopped returning my calls, flying into the empty white void felt like exactly where I belong. October 14th, that is the date everything changed. I was making a routine supply run from Deadhorse to Utqiagvik. Clear weather, good visibility, the kind of flying where you can see for 100 miles in every direction. Nothing but flat white tundra stretching to the horizon. No trees, no hills, no landmarks except the occasional frozen river cutting through the permafrost like a scar. I was 40 minutes into the flight when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a reflection on the windscreen, a trick of the light. But when I adjusted my angle, it was still there. A city, a massive, sprawling city sitting right in the middle of the tundra where nothing should exist except ice and emptiness. It was not some distant mirage, not a blur on the horizon. It was clear, detailed, real. I could see buildings, skyscrapers made of glass and steel reaching hundreds of feet into the air. Streets laid out in perfect grids, vehicles moving along roadways, and lights. Thousands of lights even though it was midday. The whole thing glowed with this strange, clean luminescence that made the surrounding landscape look dim by comparison. I grabbed my radio, started to call it in. But the words died in my throat because I realized something impossible. I knew this city, not from having been there, but from my memories, from my childhood. It looked exactly like the future city I used to draw as a kid. The one I imagined living in when I grew up. Sleek towers, flying vehicles, everything clean and bright and perfect. The city of my 10-year-old imagination made real and sitting in the Arctic tundra like it had always been there. I checked my instruments. Everything was normal. Altitude steady. Heading correct. No system malfunctions. I looked back out the window and the city was still there. Getting closer as I approached, I could see more detail now. The architecture was strange, familiar but wrong, like someone had taken modern building designs and evolved them forward by decades. Curves where there should be angles, materials that seemed to shift and shimmer in the Arctic light. Then I noticed something else. There were no people. Despite the vehicles moving on the streets, despite the lights in the windows, I could not see a single person. The city was alive but empty, functioning without inhabitants, like a stage set waiting for actors who would never arrive. I was maybe 2 miles away when my radio crackled to life. Not another pilot, not air traffic control, just static. But underneath it, I could hear something. Voices, multiple voices speaking at once. Not words exactly, more like the impression of communication. Like listening to a conversation through a wall where you can hear the rhythm and tone but not the actual language. My hands moved without conscious thought, banking the plane to get a better look, descending slightly to see the city from a lower angle. And that is when I noticed the people. They were there, walking the streets, standing on balconies, moving through plazas, but they were wrong. Their movements were too smooth, too coordinated, like they were all following the same invisible choreography. And their faces, God, their faces. They all looked the same. Not identical, but similar, like variations on a theme. Like someone had designed the perfect human face and was testing different versions. The static on the radio grew louder, more insistent, and underneath it, I started to hear actual words. My name. Someone was saying my name. Over and over, not asking for me, not calling to me, just stating it, like they were confirming my identity. Like they had been waiting for me specifically. I pulled up, hard. Climbed back to my original altitude and kept climbing. The city fell away below me. And then, in the span of maybe 3 seconds, it was gone. Just vanished, like switching off a television. One moment it was there, solid and real and impossible. The next, there was nothing but empty tundra. White and flat and absolutely barren. I circled back, flew over the exact same coordinates 3 times, searched every inch of the landscape. Nothing. No buildings, no roads. No signs that anything had ever been there. Just frozen ground and scattered rocks and the kind of emptiness that makes you feel like the last person alive. I did not report it. Not officially, just followed my flight plan like normal and kept my mouth shut. But I could not let it go. Could not stop thinking about what I had seen. That night, back in my apartment in Fairbanks, I started searching. Looking for any record of unusual sightings over the North Slope. Any reports of structures or anomalies or anything that might explain what I had witnessed. I found more than I expected. A lot more. Scattered across obscure forums and archived news articles and government records that had been partially redacted. Going back decades, pilots reporting cities, structures, lights, all in the same general area of the North Slope. All appearing for just a few seconds before vanishing. All dismissed as optical illusions or atmospheric phenomena or pilot error. But one report caught my attention. A cargo pilot named Michael Torrance had filed a detailed account in 1994. He described seeing a city, provided coordinates, even took photographs, but when the film was developed, the images showed nothing but tundra. He insisted the city had been real, insisted his instruments had detected structures, insisted he had seen people moving in the streets. The FAA grounded him for psychological evaluation. He never flew again, and 3 years later, he disappeared. Last seen heading north from Fairbanks. His truck was found abandoned near the Dalton Highway. He was never located. I tracked down his wife. She was living in a care facility in Anchorage. Dementia had taken most of her memories, but when I mentioned the Phantom City, something sharp and clear came into her eyes. She grabbed my wrist with surprising strength and pulled me close. He went back. She said it like she was confessing a sin. He kept going back, flying over the same spot, waiting for it to appear again. And one day it did. He landed. Do not ask me how or where. He never explained, but he landed and he walked into that city. And when he came back, he was different, changed. He said the city was real, more real than our world. He said it was waiting, always waiting, and that everyone who saw it was marked, chosen. Eventually, we all go back. She died 2 weeks later. Heart attack, but I could not stop thinking about what she said. About Michael Torrance walking into an impossible city and coming back changed. About being marked, chosen. About eventually going back. I started flying the route more often, requesting assignments that would take me over that specific area of the North Slope. Watching, waiting, and after 6 weeks, I saw it again. Same location, same impossible city, but this time it was different. This time I could see inside the buildings, through walls that should have been opaque. And I saw them, the people, Thousands of them, all standing perfectly still, all facing the same direction, all looking up at me. The radio static was deafening. The voices were clearer now, still not quite language but closer, almost understandable. And underneath it all, I heard something else. A hum, low and rhythmic, like a heartbeat, like the city itself was alive and breathing. I wanted to land. God help me. I wanted to land so badly it hurt. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to descend, to touch down on one of those perfect streets, to walk among those buildings and find out what was waiting inside. But I fought it, climbed higher, put distance between myself and that impossible place. And just like before, after a few seconds, it vanished. But something followed me back. I felt it the moment I landed in Dead Horse. A presence, not visible, not audible, just there, watching, waiting. And that night, lying in my bunk at the crew quarters, I started to understand. The city is not appearing randomly. It is not a glitch or a mirage or an atmospheric trick. It is searching, showing itself to specific people, testing them. And everyone who sees it is given a choice. Ignore it and spend the rest of your life wondering. Or go back, land, walk through those gleaming streets and find out what is really waiting there. I pulled satellite imagery of the coordinates. Every available source, commercial, government, military, all of it showed the same thing. Empty tundra, permafrost, nothing. But when I overlaid thermal imaging from different dates, I found something. A heat signature, massive, geometric, exactly matching the shape and size of the city I had seen. Not visible in standard photography, not detectable by normal means, but there, always there, radiating energy into the surrounding landscape. I contacted a geologist friend, asked about unusual thermal activity on the North Slope. He told me about an anomaly that had been documented since the 1970s. A massive heat source beneath the tundra. No volcanic activity, no geothermal vents, no explanation. The government had investigated, found nothing, classified the data, moved on, but the heat signature remained. Pulsing, growing, spreading slowly outward like something waking up. 3 days ago, I flew the route again, but this time I brought equipment, cameras, sensors, everything I could carry. And when the city appeared, I was ready. I documented everything, took hundreds of photographs, recorded video, captured data on every instrument I had. And through it all, the city just sat there. Perfect, impossible, waiting. When I landed and reviewed the footage, it was all blank. Every photograph, every video frame, just static and distortion. The sensors had recorded massive electromagnetic interference, gravity fluctuations, readings that should not be possible. But no images, no proof, nothing anyone else could see. But I know what I saw. I know that city is real. And I know it is not from our world, not from our time. It is something else, something that exists in a space adjacent to our reality, pressing through, trying to manifest fully. And the people inside, those perfect, identical people, they are not inhabitants. They are templates, placeholders, waiting for us to arrive so they can be filled, so they can become real. I am writing this because I am going back. Tomorrow, I have already filed a flight plan, already loaded supplies into the plane. And this time, when I see the city, I am going to land. I am going to walk those streets and enter those buildings and find out what this thing wants. Why it keeps showing itself. Why it chose me. Maybe I will find Michael Torrance. Maybe I will find all the others who went looking and never came back. Maybe I will find something worse. But I cannot live like this anymore. Cannot spend every night lying awake, feeling that presence watching me. Feeling the pull of that impossible place growing stronger. If you fly over the North Slope, if you see a city where nothing should exist, do not look too closely. Do not circle back for a second glance. And for the love of God, do not land. Because once you see it, once you really see it, you are marked. And eventually, whether it takes days or years, you will go back. We all go back. Because the Phantom City is not just appearing. It is calling. And its patience is infinite. I will update if I can. If there is still something left of me that can hold a pen or type on a keyboard. But I do not think there will be. I think when I walk into that city, when I finally answer the call, I will become something else. Something that looks like me but is not me. Something that will climb back into a plane and fly back to the world and walk among people and wait. Wait for others to see the city. Wait for more to be marked. Wait for enough of us to cross over so that the Phantom City can finally become real. Can finally replace this cold, broken world with something clean and perfect and utterly inhuman. The city is waiting. It has always been waiting. And now, finally, I am ready to see what is inside. Story 7. Weeping ice. The glacier was crying when I arrived, and by the time I left, I understood why. My name is Connor Walsh. I am a glaciologist, or I was before the Juneau icefield. I spent 15 years studying ice, understanding how glaciers move, how they respond to climate change, how they shape the landscape over thousands of years. Ice was predictable, scientific, safe, until it started weeping. The reports came in during late August. Hikers on the Mendenhall Glacier heard sounds they described as human crying. Park rangers investigated and confirmed it, a low, mournful wailing that seemed to come from deep within the ice. It happened at night mostly, started around midnight and continued until dawn. The sound was so clear, so undeniably human, that search and rescue teams were dispatched 3 times looking for lost climbers. They never found anyone. The university sent me and 2 graduate students to investigate. Standard protocol: set up monitoring equipment, record the sounds, analyze the seismic data, find a rational explanation for what was probably just ice friction or wind through crevasses creating acoustic illusions. We established base camp about a mile from the glacier, face. 3 tents, a week, some worth of supplies, equipment to measure everything from ice temperature to seismic vibrations. The weather was clear. The logistics were simple. It should have been routine. The weeping started our first night there. I was in my tent reviewing data around 11 when I heard it. A sound so human it made my skin crawl. Not just crying, sobbing. The kind of deep, wrenching grief that comes from losing something irreplaceable. It echoed across the ice field, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I grabbed my recorder and stepped outside. My students were already up, standing in the cold, staring at the glacier. The sound was louder out here, more complex. Not just one voice, dozens, maybe hundreds, all crying in unison, all expressing the same bottomless sorrow. We recorded for 3 hours. The weeping never stopped, never changed pitch or rhythm. Just that constant, heartbroken sobbing rolling across the ice like fog. When dawn broke, it faded gradually until there was nothing but the wind and the crack of shifting ice. We spent the next day analyzing the recordings. The audio showed frequencies and patterns consistent with human vocalization. Not ice movement, not wind. The sound was organic, produced by something with vocal cords or an equivalent mechanism. But there was nothing alive in that glacier. Nothing that could make those sounds. That night, the weeping started earlier, around 10, and this time it was closer, moving across the ice toward our camp. I could track its progress by the volume, getting louder, more insistent. My students wanted to pack up and leave. I convinced them to stay one more night, to get more data, to be sure. I regret that decision more than anything in my life. We all fell asleep around midnight despite the noise, exhaustion overwhelming our unease. And that is when the dream started. I was underwater, freezing water so cold it burned. I couldn't to see the surface, couldn't to tell which way was up. I was sinking, my lungs screaming for air, my limbs too numb to move. Around me in the darkness, I saw others, shapes in the water, people drowning just like me, their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes wide with terror. And below us, something was pulling. Not current, something with intention. Something that wanted us down there in the dark and the cold. Something that had been waiting for a very long time. I woke up choking. My sleeping bag was soaked with ice water. Not condensation, ice water. Like I had actually been submerged. My students were awake too, gasping and coughing. Both of their bags were equally drenched. We stumbled outside into the gray pre-dawn light. The glacier had moved. Not much, maybe 20 feet. But glaciers done to move that fast. They flow inches per day, sometimes feet per year, not 20 feet overnight. And it had moved toward us, toward our camp, like it was approaching deliberately. We packed up immediately. No discussion, no debate. We just started breaking down tents and loading equipment. That is when I noticed the surface of the ice near our camp. It was covered in handprints, hundreds of them, pressed into the surface like someone had been crawling across it. Small hands, children. His hands. I knelt down to examine them. The ice around each print was warm. Not melted, warm, like living hands had touched it recently. I pulled out my thermal camera and scanned the glacier face. The entire surface was glowing with residual heat, thousands of warm spots in the rough shape of human bodies. Like an entire crowd of people had been pressed against the ice and then vanished. One of my students, a kid named Derek from Seattle, started crying. Not from fear, from something else. He said he remembered being in the ice, remembered drowning, remembered the cold and the dark and the endless waiting. He said it wasn't a dream. It was a memory. We got him into the truck and started driving back to Juneau. That is when I saw the others. Hikers and climbers scattered across the ice field, all walking toward the glacier. Moving in that same dazed way Derek had before we stopped him. Answering some call we couldn't to hear. I tried to intercept them. Tried to turn them back. They walked past me like I wasn't there. Their eyes were unfocused, their movements automatic, and they were all crying. Silent tears streaming down their faces as they marched toward the weeping ice. We reported everything to the Park Service. They sent teams out, found 3 of the hikers standing at the edge of a crevasse, staring down into the blue depths. They had to physically restrain them to stop them from jumping. The others were never found. I started researching the history of the Juneau ice field. Found records going back over a century. Found something that made my blood freeze. In 1918, a commercial fishing boat disappeared near Auke Bay. The Northern Star. It was carrying 43 people, men, women, and children. A mix of crew and passengers heading south for the winter. The boat vanished in a storm. No wreckage was ever found. No bodies recovered. But 6 months later, fishermen reported hearing crying coming from the Mendenhall Glacier. Sounds like children weeping. The reports continued sporadically for years, then stopped in the 1960s. Started again last year, the same year the glacier began its rapid retreat due to warming temperatures. I think I know what happened. The Northern Star didn't sink in open water. It was crushed against the glacier during the storm. The ice consumed it, pulled the ship and everyone aboard into its depths where they froze instantly. Perfectly preserved, trapped in a moment of terror that never ended. And now, as the ice melts, they re-waking up. Not their bodies, something else. Some echo or imprint or fragment of consciousness trapped in the frozen water. They re-aware again. Aware of the cold, aware of the drowning, aware that they've been suspended in that moment of death for over a century. That is what is weeping. That is what is dreaming. That is what is calling to the living. Because they don't want to be alone in the ice anymore. They want company. They want others to understand what it feels like. They want to share the cold. The university shut down the research. Said the sounds were just acoustic phenomena. Natural processes that happened to sound like human voices. They warned people to avoid camping near the glacier but didn't say why. Didn't mention the dreams or the handprints or the warm spots on the ice. I quit. Can't study glaciers anymore. Can't even look at ice without seeing those shapes in the water. Those drowning figures reaching up toward a surface I'll never reach. But I still hear the weeping. Even here in my apartment in Anchorage, 200 miles from the ice field. On quiet nights, I hear that distant sobbing. And sometimes I dream I am back in the water. Back in the cold and the dark with all those others. Drowning forever, frozen in place, waiting for the ice to release us. The thing about glaciers is they remember everything. Every snowflake that falls. Every moment of pressure and time. They read geological archives, storing history in layers of ice. But they were not just recording temperature and atmospheric conditions. They re-recording everything that touches them. Everything that dies in them. And as the climate warms, as the glaciers retreat and melt, all those memories are waking up. All those trapped moments are coming back to life. The Mendenhall is just the beginning. There are thousands of glaciers across Alaska, across the Arctic. How many of them hold something similar? How many contain the frozen echoes of tragedy and death? Last week, reports came in from the Naknek Glacier. Sounds like screaming. From the Portage Glacier. Sounds like laughter. Wrong laughter. The kind that doesn't sound quite human. They were all melting, all releasing whatever they held for centuries or millennia. I think about the Northern Star sometimes. About those 43 people trapped in ice for over 100 years. Still drowning. Still crying. Still aware in some terrible way that transcends death. And I wonder if that is what waits for all of us eventually. Not oblivion. Not peace. Just consciousness without end. Trapped in our worst moment forever. The weeping continues. Every night. Getting louder as the ice retreats. And sometimes, when the wind is right, you can hear other sounds mixed in with the crying. Whispers, please, an endless chorus of voices trapped in frozen time. They say the glaciers will be gone in 50 years. All melted, all released into the ocean. But I don't think the weeping will stop. I think it will just move. Spread out across the water, across the world. Because ice remembers, water remembers, and some echoes never truly fade. I hear them now. Even as I record this, The crying has followed me south. Or maybe I brought it with me. Maybe when you listen to those sounds, when you camp too close and dream those dreams, you become part of it. Another voice in the chorus. Another memory trapped in the ice. The glaciers are weeping. And soon, we all will be. Story 8. Time slipped the gold nugget in my pocket as impossible. And I have the lab reports to prove it. I found it on a Thursday afternoon in September 1991, walking the beach in Nome, Alaska. But that is not quite accurate. I didn't find it. Someone handed it to me. Someone who shouldn't have existed. My name is Robert Chen. I moved to Nome 3 years before this happened to document the region, this gold rush history. I am a historian, which means I spend most of my time with books and old photographs, not experiencing the things I study. I prefer it that way. The past is safe, contained. It can hurt you when it's just words on paper. That Thursday changed everything. I was walking the beach near the old seawall, the same road I took most afternoons. The September sky was gray and heavy, pushing down on the Bering Sea. The wind carried that particular Arctic smell, salt and ice and something ancient. I had my camera and notebook, documenting erosion patterns that were exposing old mining equipment from the 1899 rush. The air pressure changed first. That's the detail I keep coming back to. A sudden thickness in the atmosphere, like someone had turned up the density of reality itself. My ears popped. The sound of the waves became muffled, distant, like I was hearing them through a wall. Then the light shifted. The gray September overcast became sharper, brighter. The sun was suddenly lower on the horizon, casting long shadows that hadn't been there seconds before. And the beach itself transformed. The modern breakwater vanished. The distant buildings of Nome disappeared. In their place, hundreds of canvas tents spread along the shore. Wooden sluices. Men moving between claims. The beach was alive with activity. I stood frozen, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. This wasn't a vision or a hallucination. It was solid, real. I could smell wood smoke and unwashed bodies and the metallic tang of disturbed earth. I could hear voices shouting, the scrape of shovels on gravel, the crash of waves that sounded different somehow. Hungrier. I was standing in Nome during the gold rush. The actual gold rush, 1899. A man walked past me, so close I could have touched him. He wore canvas pants stained with seawater and mud. His face was weathered, burned dark by sun and wind. He didn't seem to see me. None of them did. I was a ghost in their world, watching history happen in real time. I started walking, driven by pure historian instinct. If this was real, if I was actually experiencing the 1899 Nome gold rush, I needed to document everything. Remember every detail, the arrangement of the tents, the types of equipment, the clothing, the sounds and smells that no photograph could capture. A woman was cooking over a driftwood fire, stirring something in a blackened pot. Two men argued over claim boundaries, their voices sharp with desperation and exhaustion. A child, maybe 7 years old, sat in the sand playing with smooth stones, completely unaware of the chaos around him. The detail was perfect, too perfect. I knew the historical records. I had studied hundreds of photographs from this exact time period, and everything I was seeing matched. The tent arrangements, the clothing styles, even the types of sluice boxes being used. This wasn't my imagination filling in blanks. This was accurate down to the smallest element. I walked for what felt like 20 minutes, moving through the camp like a ghost. No one acknowledged me. No one turned when I passed. I was completely invisible to them, observing from some impossible angle outside their time. Then I saw the man who would give me the gold nugget. He was sitting on a driftwood log at the edge of camp, apart from the others. Older, maybe 60, with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much. And unlike everyone else in this impossible vision, he was looking directly at me. Our eyes met, his widened slightly, recognition or surprise. I couldn't tell which. He stood slowly, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out something that caught the light. A gold nugget, rough and heavy, about the size of a walnut. He walked toward me, through the chaos of the camp, through the bustle of gold-fevered miners. He walked straight at me. And I could tell he saw me clearly, not as a ghost, as a person, someone real. He stopped 3 feet away and held out the nugget. His hand was shaking, not from cold or exhaustion, from fear. His mouth moved like he was trying to speak, but no sound reached me. The voices of the camp, the waves, the wind, all of it was fading. Getting quieter, more distant, the old man pressed the nugget into my palm. His hand was solid, real. I could feel the calluses on his fingers, the desperate strength of his grip. His eyes locked onto mine, and in them I saw a terrible understanding. He knew what I was, someone from another time, and he was terrified. The world snapped back. That's the only way to describe it. Like a rubber band pulled too tight, suddenly releasing. The sound rushed back in. The gray September light returned. The tents vanished. The miners disappeared. I was standing on the empty modern beach, alone, with a gold nugget clutched in my hand. My watch showed that only 3 minutes had passed. 3 minutes. I had walked through that camp for what felt like 20 minutes, observing details and committing them to memory. But according to my watch, according to the position of the sun, only 3 minutes had elapsed. I stood there shaking, staring at the nugget in my palm. It was real, solid, heavy. The gold had the rough texture of something just pulled from the earth, still bearing the marks of the creek bed that had held it for millennia. I should have gone home immediately, should have tried to process what had happened. Instead, I did what any historian would do. I documented everything, went back to my apartment and filled 20 pages with descriptions. Every detail I could remember, the layout of the camp, the types of equipment, the clothing, the faces, the old man who had seen me and given me the gold. Then I took the nugget to the University of Alaska geology lab. The results came back 2 weeks later. The gold was genuine, but more than that, the mineral composition and trace elements matched samples taken from known beaches in the late 1890s. The oxidation pattern suggested it had been exposed to air for over 90 years. The lab director called me personally, confused about where I had found a gold rush-era nugget in such pristine condition. I didn't tell him. I couldn't. How do you explain that someone from 1899 handed it to you on a beach that shouldn't have existed? I started researching obsessively, looking for any historical record of time slips, of people vanishing or appearing without explanation. No, this gold rush history is well documented, but I was searching for gaps now. Anomalies, stories that didn't quite fit. I found one reference in a diary kept by a missionary who worked the camps. A single entry from October 1899. He wrote about an old miner named Thomas Wickham who had become convinced he had seen spirits on the beach. Men and women dressed in strange clothes, walking through camp but never interacting with anyone. Wickham had become obsessed with them, insisting they were visitors from the future come to witness the gold rush. The other miners thought he had lost his mind, but the missionary noted that Wickham had been a rational man before. Level-headed, not prone to flights of fancy or drink-fueled visions, Thomas Wickham disappeared in November 1899, simply walked out of camp one morning and never returned. They found his tent and belongings untouched, found his claim abandoned, but Wickham himself was gone. I'm convinced he was the man who gave me the nugget. The details matched, the age, the gray beard, the eyes that had seen too much. He had been watching time slips for months, seeing visitors from the future walk through his present. And when he finally saw someone who could see him back, someone who existed solid enough to touch, he had taken his chance. Given me proof, evidence that what he was experiencing was real, and then he had vanished. The thought that kept me awake at night was simple and terrible. If time could slip backward, if I could step into 1899 for 3 minutes, could it slip forward too? Had Thomas Wickham walked through some invisible boundary and found himself in 1991? Displaced 92 years into a future he couldn't understand? Was he somewhere in modern Nome, confused and terrified, trying to comprehend a world of cars and electricity and airplanes? I walked that beach every day for months, trying to recreate the conditions that had triggered the slip. Same time of day, same weather patterns, same route, but it never happened again. Whatever boundary I had crossed had sealed itself. Or maybe I had simply been lucky, catching a moment when past and present aligned perfectly. The gold nugget sits on my desk now. I had it mounted in a display case with a small plaque that says, Nome Beach, 1899. People who visit assume I found it with a metal detector or bought it from an antique dealer. I let them think that. The truth is too complicated, too impossible. But sometimes, late at night, I take it out of the case and hold it. Feel the weight of it, the texture. And I think about Thomas Wickham standing on that beach in 1899, watching ghosts from the future walk through his camp. I think about his fear when he realized what he was seeing, his desperation to be believed, his need to send proof forward through time to someone who might understand. I think about the 3 minutes I spent in his world, and the 92 years that separated us, and the impossible moment when our hands touched across that gap. And I wonder if time is as solid as we think it is. If the past and present and future are really separate, or if they all happening simultaneously, just on frequencies we normally can perceive. If the right conditions, the right alignment of atmospheric pressure and light and circumstance can tune you to a different frequency for just a moment. I wonder if Thomas Wickham is still out there somewhere, unstuck in time, slipping between decades like a stone skipping across water. If he ever made it back to 1899, or if he is trapped in some gray space between moments, watching history unfold around him without ever being able to touch it again. The scientific explanation is that I experienced a vivid hallucination. That the nugget was already on the beach and I simply picked it up without realizing it, my mind constructing an elaborate false memory to explain its presence. That everything I saw was my brain drawing from my extensive knowledge of gold rush history to create a convincing but ultimately imaginary experience. But that doesn't explain the lab results. Doesn't explain how a nugget with 1890s oxidation patterns ended up on a beach that has been picked clean by metal detectors for decades. Doesn't explain why the mineral composition matches samples from that specific time period. I am 70 now. I lived in Nome for 32 years. I still walk that beach most afternoons when weather permits. And I watch, always watching, looking for that shift in air pressure, that change in light quality, that moment when the boundary between past and present becomes thin enough to cross. Because Thomas Wickham gave me proof that it was possible. That time ISN, the rigid, linear thing we pretend it is. That somewhere, somewhen, all moments exist simultaneously. And if you standing in exactly the right spot at exactly the right time, you might slip through the cracks. I keep the nugget with me now when I walk. A talisman, a key, evidence that I'm not crazy, that what I experienced was real. And sometimes, when the light hits the water just right and the air pressure drops and the world feels just a little too thick, I swear I can hear them. The voices from 1899, the sound of shovels on gravel, the crash of hungrier waves, and I wonder if next time I'll be able to stay longer. Or if next time I want to make it back at all. Story 9. Final prayer of the Ketchikan preacher. I need to tell you about the sound of a man losing his soul. It is not what you think. It is not screaming or crying or begging. It is the sound of desperate prayer spoken in a voice that knows, with absolute certainty, that God is not listening. And in the abandoned Ketchikan copper mines in Alaska, that sound never stops. It echoes through the tunnels. It bounces off the rusted machinery. And if you listen long enough, you realize it is coming from everywhere at once. I went to Ketchikan last April as part of a documentary crew. Urban exploration content, abandoned places, the kind of YouTube videos that get millions of views from people who would never set foot in these locations themselves. We had permits, safety equipment, a local guide who knew the mine system, everything by the book, everything professional. We thought we were prepared for anything except what we actually found. The Ketchikan mines shut down in 1938. At their peak, they employed hundreds of workers pulling copper ore from the Wrangell Mountains. When the company abandoned the site, they left everything behind. Buildings, tools, personal belongings. The whole place is frozen in time. A ghost town carved into the side of a mountain. And it has a reputation, not just for being abandoned, but for being wrong, for having something inside it that never left when the miners did. Our guide was a guy named Frank, 60 years old, lived in McCarthy his whole life. He had been taking tourists through the mines for 20 years and made it clear from the start that he did not go into certain areas. Level 5 and below, the eastern tunnels, and absolutely never the old chapel. When I asked why, he gave me a look that made my skin crawl. Some places are abandoned for a reason. Some things get left behind because taking them with you would be worse. You want to film the mine? Fine. But we stay in the approved areas. We follow the rules. And if you hear anything unusual, anything at all, we leave immediately. No discussion. No debate. We just go, I should have listened. Should have paid attention to the fear in his voice. But I was focused on content. On getting footage that would stand out. On pushing boundaries just enough to make the video memorable. So when we heard the voice on our second day, when we heard someone praying deep in the tunnels, I convinced the crew to investigate. Just for a few minutes. Just to see what it was. The voice was coming from somewhere below us. Echoing up through ventilation shafts and abandoned passages. A man speaking in steady, rhythmic cadence. The kind of voice you hear in church. Strong, certain, filled with conviction, but there was an edge to it, an urgency, like he was running out of time. Frank refused to follow us, told us we were making a mistake, said the voice was not real, that it was never real. But we went anyway, down rusted staircases and through collapsed tunnels, following the sound deeper into the mine. And the whole time, the voice grew louder, more desperate, more frantic. Then something impossible happened. As we descended, the voice started coming from behind us. Not an echo, not a reflection. The actual source of the sound had somehow moved. We stopped, looked back, and heard the same prayer coming from the tunnel we had just walked through. The exact same words, the exact same inflection, like a recording playing in two places at once. My camera operator, a guy named Josh, pointed his light back the way we came. The tunnel was empty, nothing there except our own footprints in the dust. But the voice continued, praying, pleading, speaking words I did not recognize. Latin, maybe, or something older, something that made my teeth ache just hearing it. We kept moving, trying to find the source. But the voice kept shifting, sometimes ahead of us, sometimes to the side, sometimes directly overhead, and always praying. The words tumbled over each other, fast and urgent, like the speaker was trying to get through an entire liturgy before something stopped him. Then we found the chapel. It was not on any map, not in any of the historical records. Just a room carved into the rock about 50 feet below the main mining level. Rough walls, a collapsed ceiling, and in the center, a wooden cross. Old, handmade, covered in symbols I did not recognize. The voice was loudest here, so loud it made my ears ring. But the room was empty. No people, no speakers, no source, just that terrible, endless prayer echoing off the walls. Josh started filming, wide shots of the room, close-ups of the cross. And that is when we saw it on his camera screen. A figure, standing in the corner, visible only through the lens. Not to our eyes, not in physical space, but there on the digital display. A man in old clothing. Minister. A garb from a century ago. His mouth moving, his hands raised, performing some kind of ritual. Some kind of exorcism. I looked at the corner with my own eyes. Nothing there. Looked back at the screen. The figure was still visible. Still praying. And now I could see what he was facing. What he was trying to fight. A shadow, not cast by anything, not connected to any object, just existing, moving, spreading across the walls like oil. And wherever it touched, the stone seemed to darken, to crack, to decay. The temperature dropped. My breath came out in clouds. The batteries in our equipment started dying. All of them at once. Cameras, lights, phones, everything draining like something was feeding on the power. And the voice got louder, more frantic. The words came faster. Desperate, like the preacher knew he was losing, like he had known for 100 years that he was going to lose. Josh dropped his camera. It hit the ground and the screen shattered. But in that final moment before it went dark, I saw the shadow move. Saw it lunge toward the preacher. Saw him throw his hands up in a final, futile gesture of protection. And then the image was gone. The screen dead. The room plunged into darkness except for one failing flashlight. We ran, stumbled back through the tunnels, following our own footprints, trying to find the way out. And the whole time, the voice followed us. But it was different now. Not praying, screaming, howling, the sound of a man in unimaginable agony. And it was coming from everywhere. From the walls, from the ceiling, from inside our own heads. Frank was waiting at the entrance. He took one look at our faces and started walking. Did not ask questions. Did not say I told you so. Just led us back to town in silence. It was only later, back at the hotel, that he told us the story. In 1936, a preacher came to Ketchikan. Nobody remembered his name. Nobody knew where he came from. He just showed up one day and started talking about evil in the mines. About something that had been disturbed. Something ancient that lived in the deep places of the earth and had been awakened by the drilling and the blasting and the constant human presence. The miners thought he was crazy. Ran him off. But he came back, snuck into the mines at night. Went down to the lowest levels where the copper was richest and the tunnels were darkest. And he tried to perform an exorcism, tried to banish whatever he thought was down there. They found him 3 days later, dead, his body torn apart, his prayer book clutched in his hands. And carved into the walls around him were symbols, the same symbols we saw on that cross. Protective wards, containment sigils, all broken, all failing. After that, the accident started. Cave-ins, equipment failures, men disappearing. And always, in the weeks before another tragedy, people would hear the preacher praying, screaming, fighting his eternal battle against something that could not be fought. The company tried to cover it up, tried to explain it away. But the miners knew, and when Ketchikan finally closed in 38, everyone understood it was not because the copper ran out. It was because the cost of staying had become too high. I did not believe Frank. Not completely. Not until I reviewed the footage we managed to save. Most of it was corrupted, destroyed by whatever had drained our batteries. But a few seconds survived. And in those few seconds, you could see it clearly. The preacher, the shadow, and something else. Something I did not notice in the moment. In the background, in the deepest part of the darkness. Eyes, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Watching, waiting, patient. We posted the video. It went viral. Millions of views in the first week. Comments flooded in. Most people thought it was fake. Clever editing, special effects. But some people knew better. People who had been to Ketchikan. People who had heard the voice. They told their own stories, their own encounters, and the pattern became clear. The preacher was not haunting the mine. He was still there, still fighting, still trying to complete an exorcism he started almost 90 years ago. And the thing he was fighting had not left, had not been banished, was still there, still growing, still waiting. 3 weeks after we posted the video, Josh died. Carbon monoxide poisoning in his apartment. Detectors failed. Nobody could explain why. And the night before he died, he called me. Left a voicemail, his voice shaking, terrified, saying he could hear the prayer again. That it was in his apartment, in his head. That something had followed us back from the mine. Something that was not finished with us yet. I started hearing it 2 days later. Faint at first, just at the edge of perception. The sound of Latin prayers spoken in desperate haste. Coming from nowhere, coming from everywhere. I checked for speakers, for hidden devices, for any rational explanation. Found nothing, but the voice continued, growing louder, more insistent. And I started to notice something else. Shadows in my apartment that should not be there. Darkness that moved when I was not looking directly at it. Cold spots that made my breath fog even with the heat on full blast. I went back to Ketchikan, against Frank's advice, against my own better judgment. I had to know, had to understand what we had unleashed, what had attached itself to us. The mines were closed to tourists now. Too dangerous, too many accidents. But I found a way in, through an old ventilation shaft, down into the darkness where the preacher had made his final stand. The chapel was different. The cross was gone. The walls were covered in new symbols. Fresh ones, carved recently, still bleeding rust and moisture. And in the center of the room was something I cannot adequately describe. A hole, but not in the floor, not in physical space. A hole in reality itself. A tear, a wound. And through it, I could see movement. Shapes, things that existed in dimensions I could not fully perceive. The prayer was deafening here, so loud I could barely think. And I understood finally what was happening. The preacher had not failed his exorcism. He had succeeded, partially. He had contained the thing, bound it, trapped it in a state between banishment and manifestation. And for 90 years, his prayer had held it there. His voice, his will, his faith, all bound into the stone and the darkness. An eternal ritual, an endless battle. Neither side winning, neither side losing. But we had disturbed it. Our presence, our cameras, our modern technology. We had weakened the barrier, had given the thing a glimpse of the world beyond its prison. And now it was trying to break free, using the preacher, his own prayer against him, echoing it, multiplying it, turning his protection into a beacon that called out to anyone who heard it. Drawing more victims, more energy, more souls to feed on until it had the strength to finally tear through. I tried to leave, tried to run back to the surface. But the shadows moved faster. They poured from the hole like smoke, like living darkness, and they brought the voice with them. The preacher, his voice. But twisted now, corrupted, speaking prayers that were wrong. That hurt to hear. That made reality itself seem thin and fragile. I made it out, barely, collapsed outside the mine entrance as the sun was rising. Frank found me, got me to a hospital. I told them I fell, hit my head. They believed me because the alternative was too insane. But I know what happened. I know what is coming. The thing in the mine is waking up. The preacher, his prayer is failing. After 90 years of holding it back, the barrier is crumbling. And when it finally breaks, when that thing finally pushes through into our world, it will not stop with Ketchikan. It will spread, will grow, will consume. Because that is what it does. That is what it has always done. Feed on the fear and the faith of humans. Grow stronger with every prayer spoken in its presence. Every exorcism attempted. Every attempt to banish it only gives it more power. I still hear the preacher. Every night, every moment I close my eyes. And the voice is changing. getting weaker, losing its conviction, like a man who has finally realized his battle is lost. That everything he sacrificed, everything he endured, was not enough, will never be enough. If you ever go to Ketchikan, if you ever explore those abandoned mines, and you hear someone praying, do not follow the sound. Do not try to find the source, because the preacher is not calling for help. He is warning you, telling you to run, telling you to get as far away as possible before the final prayer ends. Before the barrier breaks, before something ancient and hungry and absolutely evil finally breaks free and remembers what it is like to feast on human souls. The prayer is almost over now. I can feel it, can hear the exhaustion in the preacher's voice. And when it finally stops, when that last word of Latin fades into silence, we are all going to find out what happens when a demon wins. Story 10. 30 days I need to tell you something about Barrow, Alaska. Something they done to put in the tourist brochures or the town records. Something that happened during the winter of 1978, when the sun went down and didn't come back up for 30 days. My name is Marcus Webb, and I was a deputy sheriff in Nunamiktuq back then. That's what they call it now, but we knew it as Barrow. The northernmost town in America, where the polar night swallows everything whole for a month straight. Most people don't understand what that darkness does to you. It's not like a long night. It's like the world has ended and you reliving in the afterglow of extinction. I was 28 years old when it started, young enough to think I'd seen everything this frozen wasteland could throw at me. Domestic disputes, drunk hunters, the occasional tourist who wandered too far from the hotel and needed rescuing from frostbite. Small town problems in a small town at the edge of the world. But on November 18th, 3 days after the sun disappeared, we found Sarah Brightwell's body in her living room. The call came in at 4 in the afternoon, though you couldn't tell afternoon from midnight by looking outside. Her neighbor, old Tom McCullough, had gone to check on her when she didn't answer her door. He had a key. He found her on the kitchen floor, still in her nightgown, surrounded by a pool of frozen blood that looked black in the dim light from his flashlight. I arrived with Sheriff Dalton within 10 minutes. The temperature outside was -35. Inside Sarah's house, it wasn't much warmer. Her heating had been shut off. The front door was unlocked, swinging slightly in the Arctic wind that pushed through the gap. Sarah Brightwell was 34 years old, a school teacher, well-liked, no enemies that anyone knew of. And she was almost completely drained of blood. I'd seen bodies before. Car accidents, hunting mishaps, one suicide. But I'd never seen anything like this. Her skin was paper white, almost translucent. Her lips were blue, but what made my stomach turn was her neck. 2 puncture wounds, perfectly circular, about an inch apart. The tissue around them was torn, ragged, like something had fed frantically. Sheriff Dalton was a Vietnam vet. He'd seen horrors I couldn't imagine. But even he went pale when he examined those wounds. What kind of animal makes marks like that? I asked. He didn't answer. He just stared at her neck with this expression I'd never seen on his face before. Fear. We called in Dr. Patricia Morgan, the town's only physician. She arrived within the hour, her face hidden behind a thick scarf and goggles. When she examined the body, her hands started shaking. There was almost no blood left in her, she whispered. Maybe a pint, if that. The human body holds about 10 pints. Someone or something took nearly everything. Could it be wolves? I suggested, knowing even as I said it how stupid it sounded. Wolves don't come inside houses. Wolves don't drain people. Dr. Morgan shook her head slowly. The bite pattern is wrong. And wolves would have torn her apart, eaten tissue. This is something else. Something that only wanted the blood. We searched the house for 3 hours. No signs of forced entry. No footprints in the snow outside except Tom's and ours. No blood trail leading anywhere. Just Sarah's body and that terrible pool of frozen darkness around her. Sheriff Dalton ordered me not to discuss the details with anyone. We told the town it was a medical emergency, a sudden death, possibly a brain aneurysm. We didn't want to cause panic. Barrow was isolated enough during the polar night without people thinking there was a killer on the loose. But 4 days later, we found Marcus Chen. He was a maintenance worker at the water treatment plant. His girlfriend reported him missing when he didn't come home from his shift. We found him in a storage room at the facility, slumped against a wall. Same wounds, same devastating blood loss, Same terrified expression frozen on his dead face. This time there were footprints. Bare feet in the snow. Impossibly bare feet in -40 degrees, leading from the treatment plant toward the old industrial district on the edge of town. We followed them for half a mile before they vanished completely, as if whoever made them had simply stopped existing. Sheriff Dalton called in the Alaska State Troopers. They sent Detective Raymond Foster, a hard-faced man from Anchorage who treated our little town like a joke until he saw Marcus Chen's body. Then he stopped laughing real quick. "You got something hunting people up here," he said, examining the bite marks with a flashlight. "Something that knows what it's doing. These wounds are precise. Whoever did this knew exactly where to bite to access the carotid artery." "Whoever?" I repeated. "You think a person did this?" Foster looked at me with cold eyes. "You got another explanation, Deputy?" I didn't. But I was starting to form one that made my skin crawl. I'd grown up hearing the old Nunamiktuq legends, the stories the elders told around fires about things that hunted in the dark. Things that craved blood, things that weren't quite alive and weren't quite dead. My grandmother had called them the Chichurn, the lost spirits who forgot how to be human. I always thought they were just stories. The third victim was 11-year-old Danny Kowalski. His mother found him in his bedroom on November 27th. He'd been dead for hours, maybe since midnight. The window was open, snow piled on the sill and floor. Something had come in from outside and taken him while he slept. The same wounds, the same blood loss, the same expression of pure terror on his small, pale face. That's when the town started to panic. Sheriff Dalton called a community meeting at the school. 300 people packed into the gymnasium, demanding answers we didn't have. Detective Foster tried to calm them, but his words sounded hollow in that big, echoing space. "How do you tell people they were safe when 3 bodies tell a different story?" "Lock your doors," Foster said. "Don, to go out alone after dark. Stay in groups. We bringing in more troopers, and I'll catch whoever is doing this." But I noticed he didn't say whoever. He caught himself, changed the word at the last second, because by then, we all started to wonder if whoever was the right word at all. That night, I volunteered for patrol duty. Sheriff Dalton assigned me to the Northwest District, the oldest part of town, where abandoned buildings from the whaling days still stood like rotting teeth in the permafrost. I drove slowly through the streets, my spotlight cutting through the darkness, looking for anything unusual. Barrow during the polar night is a different world. The darkness isn't to just absence of light. It is presence. It has weight. It pushes down on you, gets inside your head, makes you see things that might not be there. Every shadow becomes a threat. Every sound becomes footsteps. I was passing the old Winthrop cannery, closed since the 50s, when I saw movement on the roof. I stopped the cruiser, killed the engine, rolled down my window. The cold hit me like a fist. I aimed my spotlight at the roof and saw nothing. Just ice and shadows and the skeletal remains of old ventilation units. But then I heard it. A sound like wet tearing, like something eating. I grabbed my flashlight and my pistol and got out of the car. Every instinct screamed at me to get back inside, to radio for backup, to drive away and pretend I see nothing. But Danny Kowalski was dead. A child was dead. And if there was even a chance the killer was up there, I had to know. The cannery, its front entrance was boarded up, but I found a side door that had been forced open. The wood around the lock was splintered, fresh splinters lying in the snow. Something had gone inside recently. I stepped through the doorway into absolute darkness. My flashlight beam seemed pathetic, a tiny circle of light in an ocean of black. The building smelled like fish oil and rust and something else, something rotten and sweet that made my eyes water. I moved through the main processing floor, my boots crunching on broken glass and ice. Machinery loomed around me like frozen monsters. My breath came out in clouds that hung in the air. Then I heard footsteps above me, fast footsteps, running. I found the stairs and climbed toward the second floor, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The running had stopped. Now there was only silence, thick and suffocating. The second floor had been offices once. Now it was just empty rooms with broken furniture and peeling wallpaper. I checked each one, my finger on my pistol, this trigger, ready for anything. In the last room, I found the blood. It was splattered across the walls in arcs and patterns, still wet, still red. So much blood, impossible amounts. And in the center of the room, I found what was left of James Torrance. James was a fishing boat captain, 50 years old, strong as an ox. Or he had been. Now he was just a hollow shell, his eyes staring at nothing, his mouth open in a silent scream. The wounds on his neck were still bleeding slowly, dripping onto the floor. He'd been killed minutes ago, maybe seconds, which meant the killer was still here. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping the room. Nothing, just me and James, his corpse, and that terrible smell of blood and rot. Then I heard breathing behind me. Not human breathing, something faster, more urgent. Like panting, like hunger. I turned and saw it. It was standing in the doorway, illuminated by my flashlight. At first, my brain tried to make it human, tried to see a person in a strange outfit, someone playing a sick joke. But the longer I looked, the more that illusion crumbled. It was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, impossibly thin. Its skin was gray-white, stretched tight over bones that seemed too long, too angular. Its fingers ended in black nails that curved like claws. But the worst part was its face. It had human features, but wrong. The eyes were too large, pure black, no whites at all. The nose was almost flat, just 2 slits. And the mouth, God, the mouth, it stretched too wide, filled with teeth that were pointed and sharp and stained dark red. Blood dripped from its chin. James's blood. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds. I raised my pistol with shaking hands. It smiled. Actually smiled, like it found my gun amusing. Then it moved. I'd never seen anything move that fast. 1 second it was in the doorway. The next it was on me, knocking my gun aside, slamming me against the wall hard enough to crack plaster. Its face was inches from mine. Its breath smelled like copper and decay. I screamed. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I screamed like a child. It opened its mouth wider than any human mouth should open. And I saw rows of those terrible teeth. And I knew I was about to die the same way Sarah and Marcus and Danny and James had died. Then a gunshot exploded in the small room. The thing shrieked, a sound so high-pitched it felt like needles in my ears, and released me. I collapsed to the floor as it turned toward the doorway, where Sheriff Dalton stood with his service weapon raised, already firing again. The second bullet hit it in the chest. It staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it lunged toward the window and crashed through it in an explosion of glass, disappearing into the darkness outside. Sheriff Dalton pulled me to my feet. "You okay?" I wasn't even close to okay. But I nodded anyway. We found the thing, its tracks in the snow outside. They led toward the old residential district, toward the part of town where nobody lived anymore, where buildings had been abandoned and left to the mercy of the Arctic wind. We followed them for as long as we dared. But eventually Sheriff Dalton made us turn back. "We need more men," he said. "More guns. We're not prepared for this." Back at the station, we told Detective Foster everything. He listened without interrupting, his face growing paler with every word. When we finished, he was silent for a long time. "You know what you were describing?" he finally said. "You know how insane it sounds." "I know what I saw," I said. "Vampires, Aaron. Too real, Deputy Webb." "Then what did I see? What killed 4 people and almost killed me?" Foster had no answer. None of us did, but we learned more over the next few days, as bodies continued to appear. The things hunted in packs. We'd been wrong to think it was just one. There were at least 6 of them, maybe more, living in the abandoned buildings, sleeping during the brief twilight hours and emerging to hunt when the darkness was deepest. They were smart. They avoided our patrols. They struck when we weren't looking, taking victims from their homes, from their cars, from anywhere we weren't actively guarding. By December 5th, the death toll had reached 13. The state troopers evacuated most of the town. Helicopters came and went, taking families to Fairbanks and Anchorage. But some people refused to leave. This was their home. They wouldn't be driven out by anything, not even monsters. I stayed because it was my job, because people needed protection, because I looked into those black eyes and survived, and I knew someone had to stop them. On December 10th, we finally figured out where they were hiding. The old missionary church, built in 1898, abandoned in 1963. It stood on a hill overlooking the town, its steeple dark against the darker sky. We searched it twice already and found nothing, but we hadn't looked in the right place. They were below, in tunnels the whalers had dug more than a century ago, storage tunnels that had been sealed off and forgotten. The things had found them, made them their nest. Sheriff Dalton organized a team, 10 men, all armed with rifles and shotguns and as much courage as we could muster. We entered the tunnels at dawn, which in Barrow meant the brief period when the sky turned from pure black to deep purple. The tunnels were narrow, carved from permafrost, dripping with ice. We moved in single file, our lights cutting through the darkness. The smell hit us first. That same rotten sweetness, but stronger now, concentrated. The smell of a charnel house. We found their sleeping place in a large chamber that had once been used to store whale oil. They were there, all 6 of them, hanging from the ceiling like bats, their 2 long bodies wrapped in ragged clothing scavenged from victims. Sleeping, dormant in the twilight. Now, Sheriff Dalton whispered. We opened fire. The sound was deafening in that enclosed space. The things woke immediately, shrieking, dropping from the ceiling, trying to escape. But we had them trapped. We had them cornered. We shot until our guns were empty, then reloaded and shot again. When the smoke cleared, 5 of them were dead. Truly dead. Their bodies riddled with bullets, their black blood pooling on the frozen ground. But one had escaped, the largest one, the one that had attacked me. It had gotten past us somehow, fled into the deeper tunnels where we couldn't follow. We searched for hours but never found it. Eventually, we had to admit defeat and leave the tunnels. At least we killed most of them. At least the killing would slow down. And it did. For 3 days, there were no new bodies, no attacks. We started to hope that maybe the last one had died of its wounds, had crawled away to expire in some dark corner of the earth. Then, on December 14th, Sheriff Dalton didn't come to work. I went to his house and found the door open, found him in his bedroom, drained and pale, the same wounds on his neck that all the others had borne. The thing had taken revenge, had killed the man who led the attack against its nest. I was the only deputy left. Detective Foster had gone back to Anchorage, claiming he needed to file reports, but I think he was just scared. I didn't blame him. I was scared too, but I couldn't leave. Not now, not when one of them was still out there. December 18th, the sun would return in 4 days. Just 4 more days of darkness. 4 more days for it to hunt. I set a trap. I let it be known that I was staying alone at the station, working late, vulnerable. I left the doors unlocked, made myself bait, because I knew it would come for me. I'd seen it. I wounded it with Sheriff Dalton's bullets. It wanted me dead. It came at midnight. I heard it moving through the station, its clawed feet clicking on the linoleum. I sat at my desk, pretending to work on reports, my shotgun hidden beneath the surface. When it appeared in the doorway, I looked up and met those terrible black eyes. I've been waiting for you, I said. It tilted its head, studying me. Then it spoke. Actually spoke, in a voice like wind through broken glass. You killed my family. I raised the shotgun and fired. The blast caught it in the shoulder, spun it around. It shrieked and lunged at me, impossibly fast, knocking the gun away. We crashed to the floor together. Its teeth snapped inches from my throat. I could smell the death on its breath. I drove my service knife into its chest. Once, twice, 3 times. Black blood poured over my hands, hot and thick. It screamed and threw me off, staggered toward the door. I grabbed the shotgun and fired again. This time the blast hit it in the back of the head. It collapsed in the doorway and didn't get up. I sat there in the ruins of my office, covered in its blood, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. It took me an hour to work up the courage to approach the body, to make sure it was really dead. It was. Whatever strange life had animated, it was gone. It was just a corpse now. A terrible, inhuman corpse that would raise questions I couldn't answer. I dragged it to my cruiser, drove it out to the old whaling grounds, where the permafrost was thinnest. Spent the rest of the night digging a hole deep enough to swallow it. Then I burned the body with gasoline and buried the ashes. The sun came back 4 days later, beautiful and bright and warm despite the cold. People emerged from their homes, blinking and smiling. The nightmare was over. The polar night had passed. The official story was that a serial killer had been operating in Barrow. A transient who had come up from the lower 48 and taken advantage of the darkness to hunt. We killed him in a confrontation. Case closed. Nobody questioned it too hard. People wanted to believe the simple explanation. Wanted to feel safe again. But I knew the truth. And so did the few others who'd been in those tunnels, who'd seen what we killed. We made a pact, never to speak of it, to take the secret to our graves. Because if people knew what had really been hunting in Barrow during those 30 days, they did never sleep peacefully again. I left Alaska in 1979. Couldn't to stay. Every time the sun set, I saw those black eyes, heard that wind glass voice, felt those claws. I'm 68 years old now, living in Phoenix where the sun shines almost every day. But I still have nightmares. Still wake up reaching for a gun that I ascend to there, fighting an enemy that is long dead. I'm telling this story now because I am dying. Cancer. 6 months, maybe less. And I can to die with this secret locked inside me. What we found in Barrow wasn't too unique. I've spent 40 years researching, tracking reports, connecting dots. There are others. Not many, but enough. Living in places where darkness lingers. Hiding in tunnels and basements and forgotten spaces. Hunting when the sun can to reach them. They be real. The things from the old stories. The things we're not supposed to believe in. And they still out there, waiting for the dark. The last whisper fades, but the cold lingers. If you felt the dark tonight, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next story waits just beyond the ice. Tell us where you're listening from or share your own strange encounter. Your words feed the fire here at Midnight Whispers. Alaska's night is long, and our stories are longer. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your footsteps soft.